my friend and colleague, Dr. Narketa Sparkman Key. Dr. Sparkman Key serves as the Director of Faculty Diversity and Retention. She is also an Associate Professor of Human Services here at Old Dominion University. Dr. Key's research contributes to understanding and development of the professional identity of human service practitioners with research focused on marginalized populations. And today she's going to be giving a talk entitled Unconscious Bias, Recognizing Personal Bias and How It Impacts Others. So without further ado, Dr. Sparkman.
Thank you, Alan. I am excited to be here with you all today to talk a little bit about bias. And as Alan said, I am a professor and researcher here at ODU, but some of the important things to know about me is that I'm a pet lover. I have 2 dogs, and I'm a mother, I'm a traveler, and I love foods from all different cultures. So that's just to get to know me a little bit more personally. That may mean that I have a bias towards some of the traditional American foods, but I really do like ethnic cuisine. So our goal for today is really to gain understanding of bias and explore how bias impacts various cultures, but to really get to know ourselves a little bit more and talking about those biases that we are not conscious of, that we are not aware of, and how those biases can impact our decisions and maybe even impact our interactions with others. And so here are some operational definitions that I think is so important for us to really sort of understand first. When we talk about bias, we talk about it is the prejudice in favor of one thing over the other. So it could be one thing, one person, one group over the other. So we favor something more than the other. That's bias. But when we think of unconscious bias are those biases that we are unaware of. And it can be stereotypes about certain groups of people. It can be unknown biases about interactions and experiences. And we're going to talk more about where those sort of unconscious, sometimes called implicit bias, comes from. And when I talk about bracketing bias, I'm going to use that term a little bit as we talk. And I'm talking about being able to set aside those biases in order to accomplish our goals. So how do we knowingly or unknowingly become biased? And it's pretty simple. We all have experiences, right? We have experiences with different cultures, different individuals. We have experiences that we live through the sharing of others. Other people tell us their experiences, and we make a decision based on that, sometimes conscious or unconscious, right? We also are shaped by the environments in which we're in, which means that in our environment, in our home environment, we have certain preferences and things that happen in those environments that are different from other environments. And that can lead to having biases against environments that are not like our own, right? We can be influenced by our own upbringing, meaning that the things that we value and the beliefs that we have within our family that we've been taught ever since we were little people. These may be things that we can't really articulate that these are the beliefs, but these are known beliefs within our family based on how our family operates. And we were taught these things from a young age. And then that experiences of others can really be shared through storytelling. I know in my family, my grandmother was a big storyteller, and she told us about her experiences as a youth. And so as she told these stories, I began to form my own opinions about her experiences and about the experiences that she had in interactions with other people and other cultures. And so those things influence how we become biased. We are also strongly influenced by society. Some of the things that are really going on today within our society, the media, the news, the television shows, especially if you're not within this country, you may get a lot of understanding about America from what you see maybe on TV or what you hear maybe on the radio. And some of those things that are portrayed are really exaggerated to drive ratings, but there's no way to know if that's reality or not, right? And so that we begin to make biases and decisions about particular cultures and experiences based on our experiences with the media. So, what is this unconscious bias? I will tell you that everyone is biased. Everyone has unconscious bias. There is not a person in the world that is not biased. Okay. So, to say that one is not biased is just unheard of. We all have some form of bias. It is an everyday thing. It is hardwired in us. Some of it is tied to our values and our beliefs, right? So it's very hardwired. It is automatic. It is not something that we sort of think of like, are we biased? It is just an automatic decision that we sometimes make. And in making those decisions, we let our biases out. No one is immune from this. So when I say that everyone has bias, everyone really does have some form of bias. So the things that make us so unique are where our biases come into place. So we have all these different differences that makes us stand out from other individuals. Some can say, it's hair color, how we present ourselves, and those things make us stand out from other people. But those are the same things that can, have our biases come into place. For example, today my hair is sort of a reddish color, and we can say, redheads act a certain way, right? Or blonde haired people act a certain way. And so when we interact with these individuals, we assume that these individuals are going to act a certain way. That is where our biases come into play. We are basically categorizing all people based on their color of their hair, right? In a study where a teacher actually categorized people by the color of their eyes, saw a lot of discriminatory practices based on superiority with the color of eyes. So those things that make us unique can be where our biases come into play. So when I say bias, what are some types of bias? One of the things that we can easily reference and easily come to is the idea of racial bias, because we know that means discriminate based on race. But there are a lot of other biases out there. And so affinity bias is we want to be with others who are like us, right? And that's something that's very unconscious. People make friends with individuals that look like them, that have some of the same decision making as them, or that do things that they do, maybe are from the same culture as them. And so they tend to have individuals around them that may have some very many similarities that they have, right? And we find in the workplace that sometimes people hire people that look and act like them. And that's very difficult, because then you don't have the diversity that you really need to really drive an agency forward, right? So that is affinity bias. Gender bias is the preference of one gender over another. So it's like, when they say women are emotional, so they can't lead. Well, when you lump all women into this category of emotional, then you limit them. And so biases can easily lead to discriminatory practices. And so gender bias is one of the ways that we see in which these discriminatory practices come into place. First impressions. Now, I don't know about you, but I am one of those people who have to really think about my first impressions of individuals. And I will tell you, I would maybe not be married to my partner today if I went off his first impression. So first impression is really making a decision about a person based off that initial encounter with them, right? We don't want to deal with them anymore, or we do want to deal with them because of that first impression. And that is really a bias. And many of us may not even think of that as a bias, but that's a bias because you have determined that person's value to you based off that first impression. And that could have been a bad impression. Stereotype. stereotype is a very common bias because when I talked about how the media and television comes to play, and if you're not in the country in which you're viewing on TV, you can really get a lot of stereotypes from television that are just not true, right? And you don't understand that they're not true until you actually have an experience in that country. So stereotypes is basically judging or having a bias against individuals and cultures based on common stereotypes of that culture. Contrast bias is the tendency, basically, we want to promote something or demote something based on comparing it to doing a single comparison to a larger group. So we look at something and we say, like, when we compare it to this, then this is something I don't want to support because it's not as good as that. And we can do that sometimes with products that we purchase, right? We can say that this brand is a larger brand, has been around longer. So when I compare this newer brand to that brand, I'll prefer to go with the larger group because this one has not been around very long, right? Even though the ratings may say that it's very great, it's a good product to buy and it's a good product to use, right? We are contrasting it and comparing it against something else in which there's really no comparison and making a decision about it. Our nonverbal bias is really sort of crazy. It's basically we are judging individuals, we're judging things based off the nonverbal. Them never saying anything to you, just their body language, their smile on their face or lack of a smile on their face. Like people can say, oh, you always look angry. You're angry. She's an angry person because they have never seen her smile. And just because you didn't see a smile from her doesn't mean she's angry, right? You're judging them based on nonverbals, or you're making assumptions about what they're thinking about based on their nonverbal behavior. We talked about racial bias already. And the other bias is this personal discomfort, right? We promote behavior that's comfortable to us rather than reason. And so we are comfortable with certain behaviors in our environment. And so we promote those behaviors opposed to the behavior that really should be used. And a good example of this is in the workplace. In the workplace, we know that there should be no yelling or angry individuals yelling at one another in the workplace, right? But if a person was in a home environment in which yelling was just a normal way of talking and communicating, then they may not understand that in the workplace, yelling is not acceptable, right? And so that is a type of bias. So when is this idea of unconscious bias most active, right? And to be honest, it's active when we are strained, when we're stressed, when we're under time constraints, when we are doing multiple things at the same time, when we're frustrated, when we're fearful. We just go to the things that are come to us innately, right? We don't think or ponder about our decisions. We just go ahead and do and act or react, right? And that is the time in which our unconscious bias will come in because we have not taken the time to really think about our decision making or why we made the decisions. It is very easy to be biased during the times you're under stress. When we're acting and we're not self-reflecting, or even thinking through any of our decision making. And for me, I know that exists when I'm multitasking, when I'm doing multiple things at one time. I may not think of my bias or think through my decision making or even reflect on why did I go to that impression of a person first because I'm multitasking. I'm so busy. And so unconscious bias is very active when we are busy. And for some individuals, that could be all the time, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about how to sort of combat that. There are several dimensions of diversity, right? People always think that race is the only dimension of diversity, but no, there are all types of people in the world. And so there are many ways in which we are different. We're different by our ethnicity, our gender, our age, our physical ability, some of our qualities, our sexual orientation, our educational background, our location, our income, our marital or partner status, our military experiences, our parental status, our religious beliefs, our work experience, and our job classification. And believe it or not, all of these ways are where bias can come in, right? We can have bias about individuals in the military because of our experiences with maybe a family member who was in the military and maybe they didn't have a great experience. And so now we're biased about military people because of the experience of a family member, right? We can be biased about a religious belief because we don't even understand that belief and because that belief is different from our own beliefs, right? And I think a common one can be individuals who pray during the middle of the day. They stop what they're doing, they pray in a very particular certain way. And some people may have biases against these individuals because they are not a part of that culture. They don't understand that culture. And all they know is their own culture and their own beliefs. Or they could have bias against those individuals because of what they were taught growing up about religion, right? About maybe there being only one religion and they are a part of that one religion. And then we find out that no, this is not one religion. There's several, many different religions, and people have many different beliefs. And so we can have biases based off that. We can have bias based off job classification very easily. Sometimes people will look at some of the people who are in entry level positions and say that those individuals do not have the knowledge that I have to do the job, right? And an entry level position does not mean they don't have the knowledge. It just means that's where they started at that company, right? Sometimes people have 20 years experience before they even get to a company and they have to start at entry level because they didn't have the education. So there are a lot of things that can impact our biases, but all these different dimensions of diversity, the things that make us really, really unique, are the ways in which our biases can come into play. So as I stated earlier, bias progresses into discriminatory practices. So when we let our biases take a hold of us and come into play, we have to realize that we may be discriminating against an individual, a group, someone else's experience. And so we have to be very aware and very conscious of how our bias impacts others. So our unconscious bias impacts individuals, and it impacts individuals because it can make an individual feel isolated. They can feel like they are not welcomed. They can feel like their views, their experiences, and their beliefs are not valued. And within a company, our unconscious bias can lead to an uncivil environment, an environment in which everyone, or not just everyone, the dominant group is more comfortable with that environment, where the individuals that are being discriminated against are not thriving in that environment. They actually feel like they don't belong there, and this can lead to mental health challenges, stress. It can even lead to some physical challenges. It can lead to things like diabetes. So our unconscious bias do have an impact on individuals. And it does have an impact on society because it can lead to a divided society in which we think that the majority perspective is the only perspective, right? And so it can impact how we interact in society as a whole, as in within our organization, as well as how we impact individuals. So it is our ethical duty to treat everyone fairly. But we just talked about the bias being unconscious. So how do we treat everyone fairly when our bias is unconscious? We're not readily aware of it, right? How do we begin to correct inequalities when we're not aware of our biases? We're going to talk about that because the to correcting yourself and understanding yourself more is the inner work that has to happen in order for you to really overcome your bias or be able to set your biases aside. some of the steps to decreasing unconscious bias. One, you have to be able to bracket your views. And that means you're very busy. We talked about when you're very busy and you're multitasking and you're under time constraints, that is when your biases are really at play, right? Your unconscious bias really come into play. But you are required during that time to really take a pause, okay? Take a breather, really assess where your decisions are coming from. Why did you make the decision that you made? Right? So sometimes, even when you're busy and when you're under time constraints, you still have to pause and be able to set aside maybe some of your views and really examine your decision making to make sure that the decision that you made was a fair decision and was not a decision based off bias. And that is what I mean by bracket your views, because you are going to have biases, and there is no way that you can really get over that bias in a single instance, but you can be able to set those biases aside to do what has to be done. The work of decreasing unconscious bias is a focus of within. It is a way of you really getting to know yourself. If you have views about different cultures or different people, being able to really write those things down and trace where those things came from. Why do you feel this way about certain individuals or certain cultures or certain groups of people? Where did it come from? Is that your own view? Right? Is that something that you came up with? Is it something that you heard in your household? Is it something that you heard through experiences of others? Right? Recognize how your experiences have shaped your perspective, right? And stick to the facts, not assumptions. So then you go into looking at not just what you heard, not just what people told you their experiences were, but really focusing on what are the facts in those experiences, right? And that's how you can begin to change your mind about various cultures and various individuals, because you begin to question and explore yourself. Another way is to learn about others, right? To really start to interact with people that are outside that group that really looks like you and do things like you, right? We have to get to know other individuals and recognize their experiences and how their experiences have shaped their own perspectives, right? Consider how that they might see their situation and consider how your situation differs from theirs, right? And so this is the work that falls upon the individual who really wants to be a more inclusive individual and make sure that they are not impacting people with their own bias. You have to do the work, and it is work. You have to think about how your actions may impact these other cultures and individuals, right? And how you can change that, right? And to start to think about what are the facts within their story and their experiences, and how that may change how you feel about that population or that culture. So really seeking to learn, but rather than seeking to be understood. You need to engage in dialogue. Ask open-ended questions, right? I love when I travel all over the world because I get questions from other cultures because of things that they've seen or heard or experienced. And I get to ask them questions too. And we get to share in dialogue where we're learning from one another. I'm learning about their cultural traditions and they're learning about my cultural traditions. And it's really a great experience. We're listening to understand. We're not debating things. We're just talking and getting to know one another. But that's how we grow more culturally competent, more self-aware, and we learn to be more inclusive. So you offer your views without being defensive or combative, right? You and it's not an argument of views. It's not a debate of views or who's right or wrong. It's about sharing and understanding and really getting to know someone else's experience and someone else's culture. You have to expand your options, right? You have to be able to brainstorm possible solutions. You have to be able to brainstorm opportunities for you to learn and grow more, right? So, how can you grow more? How can you share in other individuals' experiences? How do you get there? And so you have to be flexible and be able to learn different ways to come to a common goal, because there's always more than one solution. There's almost more than one way to get to a common understanding. And you have to be willing to experiment with new things. And I would say you have to be willing to be vulnerable because vulnerability is very uncomfortable. Typically, we try not to do things that make us vulnerable because of the discomfort in it, like walking in a room where we are the only person there and we don't know anyone else in the room, right? How does that feel? It's not comfortable because we don't know anybody, right? But you experiment with it. You go and speak to someone else who look like they may be the only one there and they don't know anybody, right? And you begin to develop relationship in that way. You need to seek out diverse perspectives. And that means really seeking out somebody else's view, someone else's opinion on something, asking for more insight and more clarity before you make a concrete decision. Getting other voices and diverse perspectives in helps you to make the better decisions, but it also helps you in the future with really sort of addressing your bias, your unconscious bias. You really want to unveil those biases that you have and make them conscious so that you are aware of them and you can begin to set them aside and grow out of them. So that is my presentation on how we can really begin to address our biases. And I'm open for questions now.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you again for this great presentation and for taking time to talk to us about implicit bias. We do already have a few questions that I'd like to share with you from the audience, and I'm sure we might get some more from here, as we continue the session. So our first question comes from Morgan from Mosley, Virginia. Let's just go with Mosley. Do you agree with the idea that the first thing that a person thinks when they see a person is because of society, and the second is what they personally believe? Why or why not?
That's a good question. So I think the first thing that a person thinks can be from multiple things. I wouldn't say that that first thing that they thought is necessarily a view from society or a view from our own upbringing or whatever. It is really whatever we have valued and we have held on to. It can be from society, it can be from our family, it can be from how we were raised, it can be from someone else's experience and not even an experience of our own. But that first view comes from somewhere, but it can come from multiple places. And we made a decision to value that view over other experiences that we've had.
What about the second part? What about that second thought that they have?
And the second thought, I think the second thought that the individual has is typically them starting to process that first thought, right? So sometimes we have a first initial impression, and then we have a second, like, maybe that's not correct. Let me listen some more. Let me experience this some more. Let me gain more understanding. So that second thought is us trying to process our initial thought. And I would say that that second thought is where we really start to try and bracket our biases, where we really start to say, okay, this could be right, but maybe it couldn't be as well.
So we have another question. This one's coming from Senegal. Uh, do you believe that media? It's a much lengthier paragraph, but I'm just gonna pass to the key question here. Do you believe that media, such as Hollywood, TV shows, cartoons, and news network, should be pressured into changing their representation tactics to help erase more bias?
I just wrote an article on that. So, yes, I do think that media has a responsibility of being able to share more with more accuracy. But in working with the media, what I realized is that they are sharing things before the story has even unfolded. So they don't even have all of the insight or all of the information when they really start sharing these things. And so that is the reason why some of the things that they are sharing or that's being shared is often not accurate. So they do have a responsibility to accuracy, but I think also many media individuals focus on the ratings because the ratings is what bring them money. So they have to exaggerate the facts I think we need to focus on our understanding of the media and our media literacy. And that's so important. If we start to understand that what we see in the media is often going to be exaggerated by the need for money and ratings, then we start to look at where we get information from differently. I can't hear you, Alan.
Sorry about that. My kiddo was running in, so I had to pause for a while. Our next question comes from Victoria from the area in Norfolk here. So we have a local. Regarding the religious bias, President Hopeful Biden came out with a statement today that we need to do better about educating our Americans about other religions in the education system due to prejudice against religions and mainly homophobia. Do you feel this is the way to go about it? Do you think this opens floodgates for more bias, potentially incredibly harmful topics? And then they write in parentheses, I am close to the Islamic faith, so I would like the US to learn more about it, but I'm weary about it as well.
Hmm. I don't think that it opens the door to more bias. And I have to tell you, I am originally from Detroit, Michigan, which in Dearborn, Michigan, which is right down the street, has a large Islamic population. And I think more knowledge actually decreases bias. The more we understand cultures and experiences, the more we can be able to accept. I think that biases come into play out of ignorance and not having the knowledge. And so for me, I took my own children to learn about Islamic traditions and faiths and all of that. We've been to museum. I had friends who were of the culture who shared their experiences within their country with them. And I think the more we know, the more comfortable we become. So I do think that there needs to be education around religion. I didn't get that education until college, and that's unfortunate that I didn't get it until college. I think that we need to be exposed to other religions and be able to understand that there are people with views that are different from ours, and it's okay to be different. It's okay to be different. It's not a right or wrong thing. So no, I don't think more bias comes from that. I do think better understanding and better clarity comes from it.
So just to play devil's advocate, because I think I see Victoria's line of reasoning here is, if done right, you're exactly correct. Right? If done right, if people are educated about various religions correctly, then it's not going to lead to more biases. But I think the fear might be stemming from when it is done wrong or when it's done badly. When it's done from someone who themselves has biases or is not knowledgeable at all about the Islamic faith in this particular instance. So can you talk about how that can have a potential negative, or if it would have a negative effect?
I will. So this is what I will say because this is really what I'm hearing. I'm hearing that yes, there are going to be individuals who are going to present religion in the wrong light, right? And so those individual biases come into play and can impact our biases. True. I also think that we have the responsibility to do our own research. We had the responsibility to really dig into things. No one told me to teach my kids about Islamic religions. No one told me where to go or to where to begin with that. I did that on my own. So we have to take ownership of our own education when it comes to religion. And I do think bias can come into play. But I also think what I'm hearing is that there are aspects of certain religions that are controversial, right? We have heard of women's circumcision. We have heard of many other different things with different religions and different cultures that are controversial that we may not agree with. But I do think when we're seeking understanding, we need to seek to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? We are not to judge. No one is asking us, is it okay for this culture to have this? We are seeking to understand the culture and what beliefs they have and why they have those beliefs.
That's a great point. I think I would potentially add as well, maybe we also have to understand the bad of our own culture as well.
True.
Right? Because all too often we paint our own groups
Superior.
With this positive lens, like, oh, we've done no harm. There's nothing bad in our group, right? So we also have to be mindful of that, right?
I think
Okay, so
because we don't, we what we do is we live within our religion as it is today, right? We don't know the historical context of our culture and our religion. And so, yes, we need to know the historical context of our own culture and our own religion. And I think we'll find out some good, bad, and some ugly there as well. Mhm.
exactly. Okay, so we have two questions for Vodka, our resident faculty at ODU, uh, and good friend for both of us. Um,
Okay.
well, the first is a statement. So I wish this was mandatory faculty training through HR for all employees, which I think we could both agree to that. But the second part is a question. Can you tell us about the process of developing resilience skills once new student is in a new environment?
Mhm. Oh, resiliency skills. So I think, one thing about being in a new environment is the idea of being uncomfortable, right? And I do think that often when we are uncomfortable, we shy away from interactions. And I think part of being resilient is to embrace that discomfort, to embrace that vulnerability, and to be able to develop relationships, right? Even if it makes us uncomfortable. So I think one way that new students who are new to an environment can really do well is if they do embrace some relationships, even if those individuals within those relationships are totally different from them, right? And I think because we need to have a network in order to sort of grow and be able to cope and to be able to understand and learn from individuals. So the one thing that I can immediately think of is embracing vulnerability and putting yourself out there so that you can meet new people. I think that is a part of resilience, right? I've often seen new people come, new students, and I do a lot of talks with students all the time. But I've often seen new students sort of shy away from those interactions, and that keeps them isolated. And it's just not good.
So it looks like this is the last question, although we may get another question as you respond to this one. But we have a question from Luis from Mexico. His question is: how has bias affected Chinese people with the coronavirus situation?
Good question, because I just jumped off of a training that I was hosting that really looked at the impact on Chinese people with our Asian caucus. And so I just learned so much about the impact. And so, honestly, it's a lot of impact. They are experiencing poor treatment. I heard a story of someone being stabbed in a grocery store because people are assuming that if they're in that store, they have to have the virus. So and they're looking at anyone that's of Asian descent, all of them have to be Chinese, all of them have the virus. And so they are getting yelled at, discriminatory things are being said to them. Their businesses are not being, people are not utilizing their services or, going to their restaurants. So there's a huge impact right now with the coronavirus. I'm assuming that Asian individuals have had the virus and are giving the virus to everyone, and that's just not true. And so it's very unfortunate, but the impact has been negative. Mhm.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. I think with that, sometimes people will watch these videos after the fact. If you would be so gracious, if we do get questions after the fact, if maybe you can reach out to the students or give us the answers and we'll post it publicly. Do you have any last comments or question or remarks that you wish to make?
I think the last thing that I would say is that if we are going to really sort of overcome some of these discriminatory experiences that people are having, we have to really do the work to address our own biases, really do the inner work. It is actually work that has to be done by the individual. And I think that all of us have an obligation to do that so that everyone can feel inclusive. And thank you for having me.
I'll give you an ovation since I know that you can't
Thank
hear it from the
you.
audience.
Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you. And if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the Reyes team, or Dr. Sparkman Key has posted her email address there, and I'm sure she wouldn't mind if you reach out directly to her. Thank you for joining us, and please continue attending all the amazing Reyes events that we still have upcoming. We're only slightly above the halfway point. So take care, everyone.